This is a production of Cornell University.
Propagate Ventures. I guess we'll dive right in. First, this is a photo looking down a windbreak, which is also an irrigation canal, but it's one of our favorites. Most all of these photos we've taken across different farms in different states and countries and whatnot. So any questions, just maybe write them down and happy to dive in there. But agenda for the day, we'll go into an overview of how we work as a business. That's our general pitch. We'll look at a product demo or analysis snapshot. We'll review overyield as a concept, so how trees and crops together are more productive than managing them separately. Throw up a few agroforestry farms in the Finger Lakes, and then we'll look at what's been recently interesting and what's upcoming. So ag and farming get a whole lot of attention in the news in the climate change discussion, and they've really become a focal point. And so often we see images like this. This is actually former Amazon or Amazon land. And we want to move this, at least at the onset, towards something more like this. So agroforestry, it's a super old concept. It's kind of weed and poplars here. It's just a current iteration of that. And it's known to be about 40% more productive than, I guess, traditional agriculture. And we'll dive into how that works in a little bit. But say if agroforestry were incorporated onto a fraction of US farmland, the carbon data looks like those trees offsetting about 10% of annual emissions, US annual emissions every year. And with returns at or below 5%, farmers are looking for alternatives like apples, chestnuts, and timber. But it's not necessarily easy to add tree crops to farmland because there are operational, business, and financial challenges in the way. And what we've chosen to do is address these obstacles, which it really unlocks farmland, ag productivity, and investment potential for third parties looking to invest in region ag and specifically agroforestry. And this is really what AngelList did for startups and Wonder Capital did for solar, if y'all are looking for some analogs to our business model. All right, so I guess I can walk you through how we look at farms. This is a design for about 200 acres of chestnuts and elderberry and hardwood timber in Tennessee. And what makes it unique is we're not investing in not just forestry or just kind of R&D as an end into itself, but actually owning trees on land alongside commercial lands, separating trees from the land itself as bankable assets. So to walk you through how we do it, it starts with de-risking farms. So folks apply and run through an analysis process and look at every within a context of how a farm operates. So we use the holistic management framework from the Savory Institute to look at, what do a set of land managers want out of their lives and land, and from there we look into costs, revenues, yields, and labor assumptions. So just a few slides on those. We use financial metrics like NPV, value, internal rate of return, et cetera, kind of traditional financial analysis to really just elucidate how agroforestry adds financial value to the land. So revenue for different crops, labor is something I'm interested in. It's not just how many dollars it takes to manage a system, but how many people is it going to take to operationalize that farm. If it's say 20 people for an apple orchard, that could flip down to 1 or 2 people if it's a timber system. So context alignment there. We qualify projects and then group them into funds, which are diversified across crop types and geographies. So funds cohorts that de-risk each other. And once farms are qualified, connect them with investors and commercial buyers, which is a key part of getting all of these fruit, nut, and timber crops to market. And then profit share partnership between farmers, land managers, and investors. And then this is our team up until very recently. We actually have Audrey on the call as well. She's our new director of business development, and then we'll have 3 more people, so up to a team of 7 joining us by February. And so just to succinctly recap that, agroforestry econ, data analytics, project development tools, so brokering trees needed to meet investment expectations, de-risking tree crops, and connecting land managers with financing to scale agroforestry into a cornerstone of agriculture. So I'm going to switch applications now. Just jump into a snapshot. So here's a farm in Hudson, New York. It's about 4 hours from Ithaca, or 3.5 or 4. It's on 120 acres total, 50 acres open. This is mostly a chestnut and black currant combo polyculture. So zoom in here, orange rose are chestnuts, purple rose are black currant. Everything else are things like black locust, curly poplar, or biodiverse species. See if the graphs load. If they don't, I guess we can imagine them. No, I guess Google is slowing down how fast they push graphs to Notion and other external programs. But we'll go through total capital required to bring a system to break even, cumulative earnings, internal rate of return, NPV, which we'll work through later, cash flows, the discount rate that we use for the NPV, full-time land manager, so how many full-time equivalent positions, how many jobs a certain project is going to create. We actually just did an analysis for an organization down in Pennsylvania that's looking at water quality and what would scaling profitable agroforestry-based riparian buffers look like. And the number of jobs that scaled up just riparian management and say elderberry processing would create was super interesting to dive into. This site was fallow for 4 years, so we moonscaped it once and then planted cover crop just to kick back the sycamore and the goldenrod and whatnot. Row mulched everything with hardwood bark, and so it's all organic protocol. We're pretty keen on the uptick in price from organic products and whatnot. And then another thing we're doing is using raked hay as mulch, so growing in situ biomass. And I think with that, we should jump back into the keynote. We can return to all those other concepts in a while, or in a little bit, maybe in the Q&A. So back to overyield as a concept. It's really one of our favorite words to describe, because how do you have overyield? It's a good one. So the 140% statistic, it's kind of a razor. So we're going to dive into what that means. Plantation forestry on the left, so that's just trees. Grain-based ag on the right, just grain. Both canopies are 2D. What we want to do is take advantage of the vertical space with agroforestry. So here, if they're just harvested alone, on the left, that's a poplar plantation I visited in Oregon. It was about 17,000 acres of just wood. And these figures are just for today's purposes. If an acre of wood yields 100 units of wood, and an acre of wheat yields 100 units of wheat, 200 units total. But with the combination, you get less wood and less wheat or less understory crop per acre. But together, see this 140 units total at the bottom of the left column, it's a greater yield per acre in total. So 2 acres, whereas you have 200 units here, you get 280 units here. So 140% over yield. Examples of this that are really tangible for folks: Polonia, so Empress, Polonia tomatosa, and wheat, and I guess other understory grain crops in China. There's some really good data. So, pulling a few data points or talking points out of that. With rows of trees 130 to 160 feet apart or so, depending on the crop and the year, it yielded 99 to 104% of the control yield. So by planting trees, they actually increased crop yields between corn, wheat, soy, and cotton. Mostly with wheat, just because it's a C3 and or plant, and it's less zero sum than corn, which is C4 in terms of sunlight. That's at the latitude of like the border of South and North Carolina, but I believe it has the climate more like Missouri, just because they have these cold fronts that come down from Siberia. Another one of these, I guess, over yield common systems is silvopasture. So combination of trees, forage, and livestock. Data points here: on hot days in Kentucky, cattle gain 60% more weight when they have access to tree shade, or produce 20% more milk. So that's a big bump in production. There are 200,000 acres of this in the north of Argentina. I visited some of that in 2015. They actually grow yerba mate there too. So it's kind of a wood and mate, or wood and cattle situation. They also have the monocrops of all those. The bump in yield from the trees, not the bump, so the increased economic returns from trees at wider spacing arises because when you have trees really close together, they grow up as kind of spindly pulpwood thin logs that you can't really mill into any economically meaningful amount of lumber. But when the trees have more space, you get fatter logs, and you go from producing pulpwood to producing saw logs. So it's not just over yield of ag products, it's over yield of income. And how do we communicate that over yield of income? Over the 30 plus years that an agroforestry system is going to be a working farm. And we touched a little bit of that in the snapshot. But what we use is modern financial analysis to value tree crops. And so if, I guess, these are the main topics, titles. There's a slide on each. The time value of money, we have to ask, what $100 is worth to us today versus that same $100 received to us in 10 years is different, because now it's available for use. So it's it works into the opportunity cost of having or not having dollars in value. And with the time value of money, we can express, say, in 2020 dollars, in dollar a day, what is it worth to us if we were to earn $100 in 2030, or if we earn $10 every year between now and 2030, what is that worth to us in today's dollars? And when valuing tree crops, that's something that is totally imperative to communicate their value. So if we add all of those net income, we'll say bottom of the spreadsheet, add up all of their present values, that's the net present value of the system. If we were to borrow money from the bank to, let's say, operational expenditures of a system, the internal rate of return is the interest rate that the bank would have to charge to eat up all of our profits. So happy to explain more of that in the Q&A if need be. But it's the greater the IRR, the better. And this sort of analysis, what was, I guess, not surprising, but kind of reassuring to us is that it's applicable across socioeconomic groups, even for, say, subsistence farmers who are growing food, because it might not be it might not be dollar return on the time, but it might be, say, caloric return on time. And all of this kind of discounting process is applicable to any sort of yield, be that pounds, calories, dollars, nutrients, etc. So just a few more examples of overyield. This is a poplar silvopasture system that I got to visit in Argentine Patagonia a few years ago. They're in a wood scarce place, so it makes sense for them to grow that just run of the mill type of timber. And then Argentina is a big beef producing country, so cattle in the understory. This one's it's kind of like northern New Mexico, the climate there. Here's some chestnut silvopasture in eastern Kentucky. They're just really using the cattle as lawnmowers. Chestnuts are the main value crop there. And just takeaways here. Feel free to screenshot this if you want. Just to succinctly review kind of what we've just gone through. Both the trees and the understory have to create positive economic returns for overyield to occur. Clarifying on that, saying that we can grow something on the understory that we can combine a treed overstory with an understory is much more relevant when the trees and the understory are both profitable in a way that aligns with the context of the land manager. And how we've chosen to operate in this department is just to make tree crop agronomy as agronomy for annual grains and livestock production is. So we're spurring familiarity in order to make trees a bankable asset. So I'm just gonna take a breather here, have some hydration. So I actually live up in Trumansburg. So for a lot of folks on the webinar today, that's super close to them. It's about 12 miles north of Ithaca. I actually moved to this region, to the Finger Lakes, because of the presence of agroforestry that's already here. So a few farms that are doing it really well. The Finger Lakes Cider House, you can see apples and asparagus here. It's one of the most beautiful agroforestry sites in temperate climate North America that's masquerading as a cider house. So if you haven't been up there, highly recommended. Go walk around, have some cider and food. Peaches in the summer, pick your own. They do Thanksgiving turkeys. So the turkeys actually decrease pest damage from asparagus beetle to an economically meaningful extent, and decrease the pest load from on the peaches, on the fruit. So it's not just selling meat, but actually making the fruit system work a whole lot more. You pick strawberries, you can see the turkeys and the apples in the background. Another one is Wellspring Forest Farm. So Steve and Liz Gabriel, what they've done is super interesting, how they thin kind of existing early successional forest, feeding things like honeysuckle and buckthorn to sheep, and then actually getting more in what was undervalued kind of shrubland. They also do shiitake mushrooms and ducks. And then this is actually underneath a maple canopy. You can see the tubing in the background. Then thirdly, Angus Glen Farm over in Kins Glen. This is black locust, black walnut silvopasture. Brett Chedzoy was a Peace Corps volunteer, I believe, in the early 90s, or maybe 80s, came back and on his family's former dairy farm planted silvopasture because saw silvopasture in Argentina, and now has 100 head of cattle on 300 acres. He's also converting existing forest into silvopasture, doing it really well. So maintaining the health of the trees, so not set stalking and trampling the roots. And it's a really beautiful landscape. The cattle come in during hot days and eat everything in the understory. Recently, I'm just going to time check. Okay, yep, we're doing well. What's been interesting for us? Saskatoon Serviceberry. It's a great tasting berry. It's less acid than blueberries, more floral flavor. Ripens 2 to 4 weeks earlier than blueberries or currants. And so for U-pick purposes, this farm right here is called Juneberry Farm. It's actually up in Ovid. They also do pick your own. So if you're in the area, highly recommended. Guy, his name is, he's a great guy to go and hang out with as well. So Serviceberry, what's interesting, you can use the same mechanical harvester for blackcurrant, Serviceberry, aronia, maybe beach plum and whatnot. So basically staggering the harvest and better distributing that capital expenditure over different crops in different times. Another one, actually connected with Larry Smart of Cornell on this front. Biomass willow, kind of with the cost of petroleum as being its substitute right now, it's not often profitable to grow willow for chips and then burn it for energy. But feeding that willow to cattle can actually offset hay costs, has a reasonable lower maintenance return, especially for riparian zones. So riparian are kind of low-lying saturated soil that would otherwise get pugged. Pugging is when kind of cows punch through the soil with their hooves. So fill the wet spots with willow, have the cattle eat it in, say, the late fall or winter, that thaw cycle. So it's harder to do winter grazing. Cattle can't use their horns or their nose or their hooves to brush off the snow like they can in Montana or something like that. So having that biomass, that food above ground is a great substitute for hay. What's upcoming and interesting for us are, I'll give two examples of this. So I guess three things here. Sea buckthorn, it's a nutraceutical, super potent. There are 3 million acres of it across so Siberia, Mongolia, China. We're curious in how to best mechanize it and what the returns are for growing it in this climate, or kind of over into Wisconsin and Minnesota. Another thing that's upcoming is looking at across latitudes and geographies, what's the optimal number of acres of silvopasture that a farm would do well to plant? So how many hot days are there? So how many days over a certain heat index? That's one input cell, we'll say, and then how the herd, how many animal units, how much dry matter do they need on those hot days? And then forage species in the understory, cool versus warm season grasses, C3, C4. And so how do we make the data sets from different latitudes and places talk to forecast optimal number of acres in silvopasture? Same deal with windbreaks. There's another photo from Argentina on the left. It's a photo of me, but if you look at the background of these farms, these windbreak systems, it's pretty impressive. So the questions that we want to answer are, how often are wind optimized cattle? How much weight gain, how much weight loss do we have? And then what are the costs and the revenues of managing a windbreak over 30 years? I know we're coming up on time. So just takeaways: agroforestry creates overyields, use the time value of money to elucidate the financial value of perennial ag, and then de-risking trees creates trees as a bankable asset. So hopefully we didn't go over too much, but yeah, that's the scoop. Hopefully we have some time for Q&A.
So I will ask anyone in the audience if they have questions for Harry, and if people would prefer, they can certainly put their questions in the chat box. And yep, Harry, you did just what I was about to ask, which is getting off the shared screen. So questions from anyone in the audience?
Markets for some of these crops in the Northeast. Yeah. So Holst from Michael Snow. Markets for some of these crops. We'll say chestnuts. There's a lot of demand from recent immigrants. So Koreans, Bosnians, Chinese, etc. More in the urban areas. Sale and retail prices differ pretty drastically. Blackcurrant is really an ingredient fruit. Americans aren't super familiar with it. So, I mean, in terms of blackcurrant in a product that has the similar quality of Minute Maid, we have things like grape juice, but say blackcurrant in beer, wine, etc. That's a bit more interesting. And then black locust decking is a substitute for the synthetic decking. So it's resistant, lasts for 20 years. If you want black locust decking right now, most of it's imported actually from Europe. So processing, there are existing processors for a lot of things like, we'll say off-season apple infrastructure for juicing different fruits that fruit earlier in the year. Juicing, fermenting, refrigerating, transporting. We like to look at rented space and not spending more on newer capital expenditures that are necessary. There's actually a black locust mill in Ithaca, Newfield, black locust lumber, I believe it's called. But we model everything for different regions with a custom sawyer coming on farm. So yeah. How small is the minimum land for an agroforestry project? Say if a farmer wanted to beef up the riparian buffers on his or her farm from 30 feet to 100 feet wide and convert it to agroforestry to maintain economic return. Minimum land for an agroforestry project. Totally depends on the crop type. So like 1 acre of blueberry U-pick would totally work out if we define agroforestry as just diversifying with perennials. It scales up and scales down really well. The smallest farm we're working on is 30 acres of growing space. Yeah, I mean, converting buffer into agroforestry is pretty reasonable. It's just the cost of taking land out of production, and like say if you have to buy hay. Next question, what is the highest number of crop species you use in an agroforestry system? It looks like there's only 1 species in some of the systems. Association and rotation without complicating management too much. Great question. So it depends if we're going for insect, fungal, plant diversity, etc. Say every 10th row is a row of biodiversity, and then those insects can fly into the system. So we highlight maybe 3 core economic species, but the biodiversity species are, I don't want to say unlimited, but maybe up to 12. And that's a lot of that's based on what the Xerces Society says are good species for a region for insects. Do you have a general process to follow in determining what species and plants to put on a farm? How site specific do you get when picking plant communities? Very site specific. A lot of that has to do with not just the biogeophysical climate, but also the climate between the ears of a set of farm managers. So what works for their lifestyle and their land and their current system and what they want to manage. So there's a long process of holistic context development there. All right, from Sam, speak to the experience of Propagate finding research on agroforestry systems in the Northeast and how an institution like Cornell could help advance agroforestry. Finding research on agriforestry. What we do on that front is dive into a lot of university and NGO white papers on different crops and say, read 4 by 75 pages, synthesize that info and make text. Cornell is great for that with new crops coming online. So grad students writing up a, there's one just top of mind, establishing organic blackcurrants in maritime Canada. It's like the more you dig, the more you find. So definitely keep going on that front. From Mel, what amount of supply is there for crops like these in terms of nursery presence? There's an elephant in the room in the nursery world because a bunch of nurseries have frankly retired. So efficient nurseries growing a lot of these crops is definitely an opportunity. The nursery hustle is very real. Going out and finding different nurseries, some that have unique genetics aren't necessarily the easiest to order from. Ordering trees is not like ordering off of Amazon. Is there any income generated by incorporating plant nurseries into your systems? With plants that can be harvested for cuttings like willow and blackcurrant, it's a possibility, but that's not our core focus right now, though it can be. All right, from James, mentioned black walnut agroforestry in Missouri. Nice example using multi-purpose trees to offset long-term econ of growing boards. Any other examples of multi-purpose trees in the north? I guess, if James, if you could just follow up on that one with just a little bit of clarification there. And then from Peter Woodbury, can you talk about examples or plans for building up marketing and supply chains? Yes, definitely. I'll give 2 examples of buyers, brewery and supplements brand, and an egg brand. So pastured organic raised organic egg brand wants to diversify their pastures because they can't grow crops, but they can grow trees that the chickens integrate into. And then say breweries are interested in buying different sorts of fruit for their beer. Supplements brand interested in elderberry. So how do we create that stack? Holly Stevenson, do you use any forestry management techniques to assist in land management, i.e. prescribed burning, invasive species management? Forestry mulching is a big one. So that's like a wood chipper on the front of either a bobcat or a bulldozer. Prescribed burning is, one of our farms in Maryland did that. And we haven't done that as a company yet. It's on tap. We're very interested in prescribed burning, just as an alternative to tillage. All right, Mark Phillips. What are good agroforestry pathways for diversified organic veg farms? I would say things that already use the existing refrigeration and processing infrastructure. So small fruit is a good one. If I'll put this in the chat here. Can I do that? To send chat to everyone. Okay. Nope. La Durette is a market garden and fruit combo in the south of that's doing that really well. And then Nat Stein, do you work at all with agrivoltaic, like incorporating solar panels of livestock? In the pipeline as well. There's a big, very, very large solar system that has sheep underneath it in the southeast US that they have extra land where it didn't make sense to put solar panels, but they want to do the same thing, and they see that value analog between solar and trees. So yes on that. If someone's grazing solar, then it's a good fit to then go from solar pasture to silvopasture. Helloagriculture.com. Would a greenhouse space be required for plant nursery or open field? It helps just to de-risk weather events. for sure. Greenhouses are great. We've seen people grow blueberries and raspberries and peaches underneath high tunnels for frost protection and whatnot, and just season extension. So hopefully that answered that question. Also, what about herbs and medicinal plants integrated in your operations? Is that profitable? If there's a market for it and the processing works out and it fits with the context, definitely. One of the interesting ones there is Schisandra vine. I haven't modeled it yet, but I would love to. Herbs and medicinal plants. We get a lot of questions about hemp, but as I'm sure a lot of folks have seen, it's been a big boom and bust crop. So we thankfully avoided getting pulled into the CBD craze. Yeah, I've been talking a bunch, but any other questions? How are we doing on time, Sam?
We've got a few more minutes, so if there were more questions, we would be able to accommodate them.
I have a question.
Yep.
Thank you so much for this talk. It was really awesome. And Marvin Pritz gave an introduction to a lot of these lesser known berry crops in our berry production class today. So it was super cool to see how they're being economically integrated. You talked a lot about the economics of these integrated agroforestry systems. How does carbon sequestration kind of fit in to all of this? With, you were saying you're trying to reduce tillage, and have you modeled any of the carbon sequestration and long-term benefits? Yeah,
the carbon itself with trees feels really easy to model. But so it's easier to model and have an input cell for the price of carbon, but assuring what that price of carbon will be is the hardest part. So I wrote an article about this, the economic reality of agroecology. That's the title that dives into a deeper version of this, but there are a few ways that works out really well, so carbon payments. The way we're addressing this is via kind of creating those ecosystem services as a positive externality. So just doing it anyway, and the crops make the econ work out. The other one is having a municipality, not a carbon market. So a single buyer pay for ecosystem services, be those carbon or water quality payments. The ecosystem services markets in the US are generally underdeveloped, so we do definitely keep tabs on them, but we're not necessarily holding our breath right now.
And one other question I see from Michael Snow: how can we find equipment for mechanizing these operations?
Yeah, so for berries in particular, that's what you want to Google. It's basically shrub fruit mechanization. Another question that we always ask is, how do we model systems to use readily available equipment that farmers already have to manage these systems? So we don't want to go out and buy another $20,000 piece of machinery. So how do we use a rotary rake integrated into an agroforestry system? It's a basic haying implement that everyone has, or like a bale chopper to mulch. So yeah, that's a fun rabbit hole in mechanization. And then from Holly Stevenson: do you ever model your systems after other types of ecosystems like savannas or prairies? Or does stuff have a camp? Definitely on savannas and prairies. So wide silvopasture spacing kind of mimics that sparse tree system, and then wide spacing for alley cropping for grain might also mimic that.
Yeah. So Harry, based on the number of questions that came in the chat, I would say that there was a great deal of interest in your subject and your methods. And also we had a terrific turnout today, so late in the semester. So I want to thank you for sharing so much about how your firm is not only working today, but also looking to the future.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I guess Dawn and Sam and Catalina, thank you so much for hosting. We really appreciate the opportunity to come in and share what we're up to with everyone. My email is just harry@propagateventures.com. Welcome anyone to follow up there or on social media. We're just Propagate Ventures on Facebook and Instagram. I believe Nat asked if this is being recorded. Yes, I think it will be up on YouTube. I'm not sure when exactly, but yeah, that'll be available to go back and maybe decipher things that I've said quickly. Or just,
yes, it will be available. I can't tell you quite how soon, but it will be on the section of Horticulture website. So thanks again, Harry, and farewell to all of you from the fall semester, and we will hope to see you again in February.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.